Okay, could you take a seat? Take a seat, please.
Both of them, Lennart and Ivo, were IOC members at the same time. So we basically said yes to
Lennart and Ivo, same time.
Oh, yes, I think the fastest.
So they're lucky, both they're lucky. They're very lucky. Both. This is a lottery because... Please, could you take your seat because we want to start again. We have a lot of work to do still.
We can invite them up.
We have 2 doors to close, not one this time.
But we can invite Paris up because they have to walk all the way.
In the meantime, I can invite Paris to come up. Etienne or...
And Jean-Philippe.
So we save time. Come up to... Please. Okay? Take your seat. Tony. Sit there, sit there.
Sit. Okay.
Tony, I didn't see you.
Hello, Francesco.
So we start, please close the door and wait 1 second, Tony, we want to be... Okay. Okay, our friend from Paris, they don't plan to do a presentation, but to say a few words, and it's always very interesting to know what is going to happen. As I said, we are very close to Tokyo, and we are very far relatively from Paris, but it's very important to know and to receive the message of our friend from Paris. So, Tony, please.
Thank you, President. Thank you very much. Dear friends, what a pleasure to be with all of you today with the delegation Paris 2024. Since the session in Lima, we have been working a lot, continuing to set up the foundations of the Paris 2024 Games. So what is important for us to know is the fact that we will continue to have a good team coming from sport in the business. So with Etienne Taubois as the Director General, the CEO, and Jean-Philippe Gassien, the Sport Director. So it was important for us to have people knowing sport, dealing with all of you. We have also worked a lot to make sure that all the stakeholders will be involved in those games in Paris, but also having in mind that the sport movement will be leading the organizing committee. So far, so good. The journey will be long, but we had already a first IOC project review last week or 2 weeks ago, and it went very well. So we will be very happy to work with all of you in the coming months. We already had the Olympic and Paralympic law established and approved by the Parliament. And now we are building the staff, recruiting the people in charge of the different matters. So we are ready to review the project and to prepare the next and the first Coordination Commission meeting in June. So I won't be too long because Francesco just asked me to say a few words, but just to share with you the pleasure that we will have to prepare the best games ever in Paris 2024. And again, you have a very committed team ready to work with all of you. We have started with some international federations, and we will continue in the coming weeks and months to work. So we are here to work with you, and so don't hesitate to ask questions and to come to us to prepare the next steps together. So thank you very much. I will not be longer, but I wish you the best for the end of this meeting.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you,
Merci.
Etienne. And I wish you, and surely in the next meeting, Paris will be a key topic. But we are confident. We have very good friends and very qualified people, so we are confident that everything will be okay. So we move to the back in our agenda to the point 7. This is again one of the key reports. It's a report of the IOC on matter related to the Olympic Games. So the director should be here, Christophe Duby. First of all, let me say that both director of the games and director of sport are here. But let me say thanks in particular with Kit. We have a daily relation, but to thank Christophe Duby because I've been perhaps a little bit tough in the last meeting, asking him to come and to see. I told Christophe that the family of the International Federation is perhaps the more difficult, but also the more interested in what is going on in terms of the evolution of the model of the games. And since Christophe Duby has presented to the executive board of the IOC in Pyeongchang this document that has been endorsed under the name of New Norm, that is basically a document to try to reduce the cost of the game without damaging anything in operating terms, I asked him to explain in a meeting like this one, as is the best way to gain consensus and to understand what really is going on. So this new norm is a result of a big effort of many people. I was involved a little bit also, and but basically, as Christophe Duby, as the leader of this team that produced this document, very important document, and I ask you really to pay attention and to put forward questions, because it's the key time to understand really what we want to do. These documents on one side are vital for the future of the game, on the other side are dangerous because can be used by different stakeholders to, as I said many times, to do what they want. So we heard this morning from our friend from Japan, sometimes that they mention it as the new norm. And this is really the dangerous part of this evolution. So, Christophe, thanks. I apologize for being so tough with you to force you to come in any way. And, but I thank you because you are here, and thank you for your presentation.
Francesco, thank you so much. It's great to be here with you this afternoon. Francesco, two things to start with. First, you didn't have to force me to come. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And it's about probably the 10th time that I've got the privilege of being in front of the Assembly. The second thing, Francesco, that I would say is, yes, there were a lot of efforts into the new norm. But you always give us the example. You always had a vision, you personally and a number of you in the room here, for doing things in a simpler fashion, trying to use the expertise, cut across complexity. So we started, Francesco, a few years ago with the role of the International Federation, the Sport Delivery Plan, and we've done that. I've heard the comment this morning, and it's not perfect yet, but we're going in a direction where the capabilities of the federations are used in the context of games organization the way you do it in your own event. And that's tremendously important. The new norm is not about cutting the experience. Sport and the athletes remain at the very heart of what we do. We are clear about that. But it's about cutting what is not needed. And you will hear from Kit that there are a number of things that we have done in the past, a number of things we have delivered that were not consumed. And we have to make sure that in the future, what we plan, what the OCOGs deliver, and what we consume overall as a family match. And currently it is not the case. So we don't want to cut in the experience, but cut in what is not needed. It's about using the resources and capabilities where they are recognized and where they exist. It's about using systems that the OCOGs will not have to reinvent. Finally, it's about reinforcing the value propositions from a games organizer's standpoint. If you look at the past candidature process, and we are into the 2026, and I'll speak very briefly about 26 afterwards, but we come from a period where you had more than 10 cities bidding at the time, to a 24 campaign where we started with 5, ended up with 2. We have a fabulous lineup. Let's be very clear. What we do with the cities we have currently ahead of us is absolutely fascinating. We have great opportunities, including with Paris. But we have to recognize that if we are immensely successful at the time of the games, hosting has become a challenge because of the size, because of the complexity, and sometimes because about the perception of the cost of organizing the games. Here we have to be very clear, we're speaking only about the OCOG's budgets. So, back in 24, we had 6 recommendations in the context of Olympic Agenda 2020, and those were about the bidding, make it simpler, the organization, make it easier, more flexible, and finally about the legacy of the games, a cradle-to-grave approach, bidding, organizing, and eventually delivering the legacy of the games. So we had 6, I would call them intentions at the time. And we've moved from 6 to 118. The new norm is about the actions sitting behind the intentions of the 6 recommendations adopted by the IOC session. So to do that, we have a working group. You see here an executive steering committee headed by John Coates and representative of the Olympic movement. We've made a number of presentations, hosted a number of working groups. And Francesco, thank you for participating in this. Very important as well, we have solicited a number of NOCs, 28 of them, because it's also about the Olympic Village, and this is very central to the new norm. It's also doing the right things with regards to providing the services that are needed for the athletes, but the right sizing of the village as well. The result is 118 measures. We have redesigned completely the candidature process. We have 10 measures in this respect. We have reviewed also the IOC strategic legacy approach, and this was adopted by the Executive Board last December. And finally, we have games organization with 100 measures. Combine 118. And one of the strong messages that we are trying to deliver now to the interested cities for 2026 is that we want the games to adapt to a given city, to a given context. We don't need the games to push a city or a region into unnecessary developments. And this message has been heard. I don't want to go through the old candidature process for 26. We don't have a candidature process starting before another handful of years, since we're going to go for 32. But the result of what we have done is really tremendously important. It's the fact that if we work in a dialogue with the cities, we can be sure that involving the experience and the expertise, including of the federations early in the process, we can design projects that fit the long-term needs of the federations and of the Olympic movement at large, but importantly also fit the needs of a city, of a region, of a country. This message has been understood. We have currently 7 cities interested for 2026, which is a great number. We're coming from a far smaller pool for 2022. We have now 7 interested. I'm not saying that the 7 will be bidding. What I'm saying is that we have generated interest from these cities and from this country, and this is tremendously important. They have understood the message that we all together want to offer a value proposition that is good for the citizen of the hosting cities. The main change compared to the past is that the candidature process itself is only 1 year. It was 2 in the past, so it's a reduction of cost, straightforward. But it's also that for a year, we have this dialogue during which we, all together, participate in the development of the various projects. So this is a partnership that is forged from the very beginning and that will continue then in games organization. On the legacy front, 8 measures. Most important one, embedding legacy and legacy vision from the very beginning. And here, in the case of Paris, in the case of Los Angeles, it's very clear, and we're happy with what they have done. They showed the way for 2026. What is the purpose? What is the sense? What are the key messages behind why we are bidding and why we are hosting the games? And legacy is the #1 area. One thing, I'll just mention point 3 here, and I think we all agree. One thing we don't do as a family is necessarily to go back and celebrate about success from the past. So something in the legacy here that is not too complicated, but just celebrating some of the cities that have helped us to organize the games, that have hosted the games, is tremendously important. Finally, and Kit will be speaking in much more details about the 100 measures pertaining to games organization, but basically we have 3 streams of activities. One, on games governance. We want to make sure that all in all, as a family, we have more control over our destiny. We have created in the context of Tokyo and now replicated in Paris a joint steering forum where we, alongside with representative of governments, representative of the OCOG, are working together on some of the mainstream activities. It is important that we have additional control over the OCOGs, but also over the public entities. We want to make sure we have sound conversation in this respect. And by the way, in the context of Tokyo, irrespective of the discussion this morning, when it comes to capital investment, by having that working group, we could save more than $2 billion, $2.2 billion. So that's already a good achievement in this respect. The second thing is about games requirement, and Kit will mention a number of observations and data from the past. You will see that what has been delivered has not been consumed. In some areas, more than 50% of what an OCOG offers is not being consumed, and Kit will give you a number of examples in this respect. So what we're going to do is to right-size a number of requirements and a number of services. Won't be shooting in the dark. We have data from previous games, both winter and summer, and this is something that we're going to discuss with you individually. And finally, the support to the organizers. And here I go back to the famous discussion we had at the time regarding the role of the International Federation and what you could do. How fabulous it would be if we have a standard operating plan that an OCOG can start with and not plan for 7 years. If we do that, if we offer solutions, if you are able to provide some critical piece of games organization, it's not a 7 years journey. The contract will be signed 7 years out. The first 3 years we can discuss about engagement, about developing the brand, about commercializing the brand. When it comes to organizing the event itself, with everything that you could bring and everything that the market can bring as well, we have 4 years, and 4 years will be more than sufficient. In that case, we have a direct, straight impact on the number of resources from an OCOG standpoint. All in all, we believe that compared to the previous model, we can make some savings, important savings. The best is the example of 2026. We have delivered the games, most recently in Pyeongchang. The budget was a little over $2.2 billion. The candidate cities using now and applying the measures that Kit will be presenting afterwards are all coming with 1.5 to 1.7 billion, which is roughly the 500 million savings we were anticipating. So really it has a big impact if altogether we work alongside these 118 measures. So this is a general introduction of where we are and the intention behind this effort, but now Kit will explain in more detail games organization and also the role and the impact, the involvement of the federations. Kit?
Thank you very much, Christophe. Good to be with you all again this afternoon. I think you referenced the 100 operational recommendations, Christophe. I think, Cornell, you'll be happy to know I'm not going through each of them one by one, but I did want to just give a little bit of an overview about the general themes of what we're aiming for with these recommendations, but equally put that in the context of how we see this working with you as international federations, because you would have heard some of the discussions about the new norm from Pyeongchang. You will have heard, obviously, the context that Christophe has given, But we want to make this practical, and we want to make it a real game changer for you as far as possible with Tokyo, but certainly as we look forward to Paris and beyond. The aims of the new norm, and we've put this very deliberately at the top of the list, is to continue to focus on delivering a world-class sports event with the world's best athletes. You will have heard, and I think there were some references this morning, to the cost-cutting measures, and we are aiming to reduce the cost and reduce the complexity of delivering an Olympic Games. That's clearly a goal. That is a goal for all of you as you deliver your own events. But in doing that, we are keeping the focus on making sure the Olympic Games remains the world's greatest sport event, and keep that focus on sport, on the athletes, and on delivering that. Within this, we want to introduce a little bit more flexibility. And we know flexibility can bring complexity, it can bring some confusion, but here we want to put in place some structures where your voice is heard, you have the information you need, and we can adapt the model of delivery for a Games to the host city, to you as a federation, and to your context as a sport. We want to build on the models that you've already developed for your own sport, the models that may already exist in the host country, and build on the best practice that you bring. And fundamentally, we want you to have a greater involvement in the planning and delivery of the Games. We know, and we heard this clearly this morning in regard to Tokyo, to do this, you have to have clear information. You have to have your voice not only heard, but actually listened to and acted on. And here, this is the goal of what we're trying to achieve. If we move forward and touching on some of the points that Christophe made in regard to the governance and the stakeholder engagement, the role of the Coordination Commission will continue and hopefully be clearer also in the future. We want the COCOM in the future to focus on the overall picture, the overall position of where we are with the Games, how we're trying to deliver against the vision of the Games, and that wider vision. But within that, we also want to make it more impactful and more practical in some ways by building on something that Francesco has pushed through the steering committee of the development, and that's to have dedicated working groups within each coordination commission, focusing on, for example, sport and the athletes in greater detail, particular subjects, be it water quality, venue clusters, whatever it might be, making the Sport Bureau in Tokyo more empowered, making the sport delivery plan more impactful, these types of things. So keeping the COCOM with the wider view, but within the COCOM structures, having dedicated and specific working groups on particular subjects with goals of outcomes from those meetings. Equally, as Christophe said, we want to move forward with something that has developed a little bit, maybe informally around Rio, more formalized for Tokyo, that joint steering forum. As Christophe mentioned, the traditional models of Games organisation, Games delivery have focused on that interface between the IOC and an organising committee. But we know, just like your own events, that often it's not the organising committee who's ultimately making a number of the decisions. It's the local authorities, it's the government who is funding the Games and has the decision-making power, not only on budget, but also around some of the regulations, some of the legislation, and other decisions that are needed, transport, volunteer programs, and so on. So with this joint steering forum, we have not only the OCOG, but the local government, along with the IOC and key partners at the table, and it provides an escalation mechanism where needed to take those subjects and put them in front of a forum where we have the government at the table. And as Christophe mentioned, this was the type of structure we used in Tokyo to reduce the overall infrastructure budget by over $2 million US. Also, we want to move into a more streamlined Games planning cycle. We have found that with that focus on reducing inefficiencies and increasing impact, we can reduce some of the planning that is done early in the cycle. You'll see with Paris, we want to keep a focus on what we need to discuss, venue design, venue finalization, but not moving too early into detailed operational planning that only has to be revisited later in the cycle. So again, that 3+4 of having a clear plan about what we do in the first 3 years, keeping the organising committee light but focused, and then after the previous Games, using the experience of the previous Games, ramping up on the operational side. So doing things when they need to be done, not revisiting them unnecessarily, but also being clear that we're not leaving things too late when we know the costs get driven up. And then finally, taking an event-focused approach. We've talked a lot in the last couple of years since the launch of Agenda 2020 about the potential move to an event-based model. We've done that on the Olympic program. We are looking in Paris to increase the structural focus on the event itself and move away from this traditional balance between sport and venues, but move to a more integrated organising committee model focused around delivering the event. This will obviously bring you to the table in terms of the flexibility around your own event delivery models, because we know you have different models for your own events, your own World Championships, different types of events you have. And as we look to move to that event-focused structure in Paris, we want to have that discussion with you about what models work best for your sport, rather than just continually replicating the same models we've had in place for probably the last 10 or 15 years of Olympic Games planning. If we move on and have a look at how we see some of the levels of involvement, I might just go back a slide here. The other thing to mention before we go off this slide is also the fact that here we're talking about integration not only of IFs, but also all of our business partners. And you can see under the business integration here, we're talking about not only the IOC, not only you, but also all of our top partners, bringing their experience and their expertise better into the planning, the OCOGs, and also all of our other partners, including NOCs. Because like you, the experience inside the NOCs has grown, and we want them as part of this, this solution moving forward also. In terms of some of the areas we're looking at, obviously the venue requirements are important, and having you at the table at the start of the process, and I'll explain how, is critical. You can't help us find solutions and improve impact if you're not part of that solution right from the start. And here with Paris, we want you at the start of that discussion, not only talking about which venue you will use and where that location is, but talking about how the venue is designed and how it will operate. The key question for us is effectively saying, if this was your World Championship, how would you approach it? And then we can identify the differences for the Olympic Games and find out why those differences are there. But instead of just replicating games models from previous games and taking those forward to Paris, we want to have a meaningful discussion with you about how you would approach that venue, how you would approach that event, and how we can find efficiencies, not just cost savings, but also looking at your priorities. Because if we can save money, if we can save complexity, we can redirect some of that to what's more important. For you, it might be sport presentation. It might be branding. It might be improved services for the athletes. It might be improvements in the training venues. But with you at the table and finding those overall savings, reducing that cost and complexity, we can better have that discussion also about where you would prioritize at your own World Championships and see how we could build that into the planning for the Olympic event as well. All of this is not just focused on sport, because we know that the competition venues, the training venues are only one part of a much bigger and wider games budget. And here we're taking a holistic approach, not only the venues, but also how we run and operate the Olympic Village, keeping that unique Olympic experience for the athletes, but also looking at where there is changes potentially to scoping and services at the Village that we can use to adjust, looking at the IBC, the MPC, all of the Olympic venues in the same way to find those savings in the cost and complexity. Equally, we know how big some of the other budget drivers are, be it technology and energy, transport, media services, and so on. There's no point in us saying we are focused on delivering an incredible sports event if we're just focusing on reducing cost and complexity in sport. We have to look across the board and find savings in some of those other big budget line items and drive those forward, as well as looking in sport ourselves. Christoph mentioned some of the things we've identified for previous games. When we look at the research we've done for London and Rio, we see some of the usage rates of lounges in venue at lower than 50% across the games, including lower than 60 or 70% at peak times. We see a lot of the parking and transport systems using less than 50% of the scoped resource and scoped space in the course of a games. We see workforce break areas, for example, having less than 50% usage across the games. So again, there's no point in us standing here and having a discussion with you about finding savings around IF services, venue operations, without looking at all of those other areas, and again, working with you to find out what works in your own events and seeing what are we doing differently in a games context and why. In terms of the involvement of the international federations, as I said, we'll look at all of those elements, and then moving forward, we will also look at our support to the organisers. This is really touching on what I mentioned earlier, of bringing our experience to the table along with the NOCs and looking at also turnkey solutions. This has come up before, I won't go through it in a huge amount of detail, but we are continuing to find that organising committees, who often are the least experienced part of the overall mix of organisers between you, NOCs, ourselves as IOC, top partners and so on, the organising committees are asked to build systems, sign contracts, and often end up being with the same people games after games. And here, there are certainly ways we can look at it. We've done it in some of the data areas in both Rio and Pyeongchang, and we'll look to expand those turnkey solutions, particularly looking at areas like ticketing, hospitality, sport presentation, as we move forward to try and find some more efficient solutions. How are we looking to involve IFs moving forward? There was some discussion this morning around the sport delivery plan and how it's working in Tokyo. We still see the sport delivery plan itself being an important part of this solution, because the sport delivery plan for us is only as good as its implementation. But in terms of the actual structure and role of the sport delivery plan, for us it still is very important in bringing together all of the elements of event planning into one single document. It's designed to be a working document that continues to evolve as more detail is available. It should give full visibility to international federations in terms of who's doing what when, and also provide a base for discussion and actual documentation of what your role is in a number of these areas. But it has to give clarity in terms of those roles and responsibilities moving forward. So we see it as being the basis moving forward for that discussion on potential transfers of roles and responsibilities, but the information in it has to be clear, its use has to be clear, and it needs to be owned within the whole organising committee, not just the sport department of an organising committee. In terms of implementation, the Executive Steering Committee that Christoph discussed will continue to stay in place with Francesco as the representative of the Summer Federations. We are going to move into individual meetings with all international federations, though, to talk about how we're going to do this in more detail. We've distributed to you all of the documents previously, I think last week. The 118 measures, the presentations that were given in Pyeongchang, but we know this is a lot of information. We know also the proof is in the pudding about the practical implementation on this and how we can effectively engage with you. So what we want to do is move forward a discussion on a sport-specific and international federation-specific basis. So we will look to put in place with you one-on-one meetings with each of you. These are probably, with the scope of what we want to discuss, not going to be one meeting of 1 or 2 hours, but be a number of meetings where we can start to work through the implementation and have you at the table discussing this with us, and look to really discuss 3 different elements in those meetings. One, with you and anyone else from your federation you want involved, be it a sport director, be it some external consultants, whoever you want. Have a meeting with you to talk in more detail about what new norm is and how we see it working in regard to your federation and your sport. We'll do that also by talking practically about the venues for Paris, and we will have Paris at the table with us when we have these discussions. So we're not talking about model venues, we're not talking about theoretical venues, we're talking practically in regard to having you at the table and talking about your venues in Paris with the Paris Organising Committee at the table in those discussions. If it was your venue, your World Championships, how would you approach the event? How would you approach the venue? How would we find savings, and where would we focus more on the priorities for you? So we'll do that practically with Paris at the table, and where relevant and where possible, we'll also have LA at the table. So we can start to look at implementing models moving forward and building them into those discussions. As part of that, we'll also talk about the evolution of your sport in the program, because there's some elements of sport consideration, the event program, the competition formats, the competition schedules, that drive how we can approach the usage of those venues. So we'll also talk to you about the evolution of those elements. And again, not just talking about savings, but talking about what are the most important things to you to help deliver your Olympic sports. So in terms of the timeline, we're looking to move quite quickly in terms of the implementation. We will reach out to you in the coming couple of weeks to start setting up these IF-specific meetings. We know a number of you are starting to move into your summer event seasons, so we'll be flexible around your timetables, and we'll figure out where and when is the best place to do this. As I say, we're not looking to finish the process in one-off meetings. The first meeting will probably be one to explain and discuss in more detail and explore the priority areas for you to start these discussions. We'll come with all of the information we have about where we see opportunities to reduce cost and complexity, and also the feedback you've given us previously about how you would like to prioritize certain things in the Olympic Games moving forward. But we'll set up those first meetings over the coming couple of months, and then throughout the second half of this year, we aim to meet with each of you to move into a process in more detail. Your point of contact will be us as IOC Sport, but we'll work very closely with Christophe and his team, all of our experts, and as we say, we'll have Paris 2024 at the table when we do that. And we'll also liaise closely with Kelly and his group, the multi-sport working group of ASWF, in terms of monitoring the implementation process and seeing if we need to adjust it along the way. And then just finally, how we see the practical implementation on a games-by-games basis. For Tokyo 2020, and I'll talk separately about some of the things we're focusing on with Tokyo, but in terms of implementing this process, we want to strengthen the role of you as far as possible using the sport delivery plan. We know this is not easy in the context of Tokyo. We know it's always hard trying to implement new models as a transition, but these philosophies and these goals we want to at least have discussions around for Tokyo, because they're things that are on the table anyway. How can we work together with shared information to reduce cost and complexity, and also what are the things we want to focus on to deliver world-class events in your sport? With Paris, we want to implement this process fully, and a practical involvement with you for every stage of venue planning and event delivery, and explore any new event delivery models that you think might be worth exploring for your sport. And then with Los Angeles, have them involved in those discussions for Paris, and look to build off the experience around Paris 2024. So in summary, we want this to be a fully collaborative process. We know it's a lot of information, and that's why we want to sit down with you one-on-one and see how best we can work through the implementation with you and have you at the table every step of the way. And in doing that, we want to add greater clarity around what your role will be and should be moving forward towards Paris and beyond, and the scope of your involvement. So Francesco, that was hopefully a comprehensive overview, but also somewhat of an introduction as we move on to IF-specific discussions. But I think Christophe and I are available to have any answers and discussions to any questions before we move on to other elements of our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Christophe and Kit. I think we got a very extensive philosophical presentation of what are the intention of this process. And I open to question, perhaps with some examples, some more practical method, perhaps to you to understand not only the aim, but also the process of proceeding with this saving cost exercise and more involvement of the federation. So I can say many more concepts that has already been presented. I believe that you understand at least the frame of what we aim to achieve as an Olympic family. But I believe that we would need some more examples, some more. So this is the right time to ask our two friends if you want some clarification. Otherwise, we move on other matters. Please. Yes. Please.
Thank you, President.
Antonio.
A question in relation to the sport development plan, the SDP. or a remark in relation to that, is that it is a central tool in the whole approach to the games. Now, one of the things that we feel is important is that there is a clear transfer of knowledge on the SDP between games, because otherwise it is just a tick box ticking exercise. And especially keeping track of why certain things worked and why they didn't work. You talk about turnkey solutions. Wouldn't be one of the key turnkey solutions be the whole monitoring of the SDP, and that there is a tool implemented, perhaps Tokyo is a little bit late, but especially for Paris and in LA, that can be shared among all partners to keep track of, are we on track with all the different elements of the SDP, and if not, why did we miss a deadline, and or why was deadline too early? And this would be a very good tool for all of us to work on the future.
Thank you, Tom. Question? Kelly?
Thank you, Christoph and Kit. I had a long list of questions prepared, but you answered all of them. So just to say, I think I took a look at the recommendations that ASWAF prepared after, sorry, is this working properly? And in the post-games report, and I think all of them have been captured in your presentation. So I think that's proof that the analysis is rooted in previous games. My question is this: I think the challenge is, and I felt a little bit, I think Kit, you mentioned it, I felt a little bit this morning for Tokyo 2020, because to try and implement a fundamentally different approach in midstream is very, very difficult. So really, I wanted to ask is I think we believe in the working group that the fundamental change comes from the event-centered approach. And can you give us a little bit more detail on your discussions with Paris and LA and how they are looking to change what is a big change in the structure of how OCOG operates?
Please. Okay.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Christoph and Kit, for a very clear presentation. I have 5 to 6 questions, but listening to Kit offer that he is going to have these individual sessions with IF, I think that will be right platform to address. My general question to these new norms is how it means for the host cities, how they interpret all these new approach. I can say it is not really funny, but while we were discussing the Agenda 2020 in Monte Carlo, the first voice heard was already in Tokyo streets. And they tried to find a good opportunity all the way and bring a different interpretation in some aspects, and that was ultimately challenge for international federations. So I think what I am trying to say here, if you have already detailed on the risk analysis, on the implication of all the aspects, a wonderful new norm elements there. That is my question at this stage. And second, that in implementation phase, how we can get that support. This morning I had one question that the athlete's experience and the athlete's performance aspects should not be compromised at any stage. So I just conclude here with my general question, and hopefully we can overcome and work together. Thank you.
Just
Paul,
a very...
Thomas,
Oh,
Paul.
sorry.
I said Paul. Paul first.
Thank you.
And then Thomas.
A very simple suggestion, which I think could help us all on the SDP milestones. Right now, we have received in an Excel format, and I assume everybody else has. If we could move to a sharing tool, something like Smartsheet, where we can in fact, all three parties can track that online at any one time. That would, I think, help everybody.
Thank you. Thomas, badminton.
Thank you, President, and thank you very much to Christoph and Kit for this introduction. I mean, I think what I wanted to say is that, I mean, it's been a very, very learningful period of actually working with SDP, because I think it's not alone the SDP and the paper we get out afterwards. It's more the process that we all go through in terms of learning and realizing what is the individual needs through those discussions and the process we've been through. So I think that's really, really good. The question, and maybe that's only answered when we get to the individual meetings, so you don't need to necessarily answer it now, but I would like to ask whether you intend to maybe give us a little bit more deeper sight to what is actually happening behind it, because if this is about cost, we have experienced in several Olympic Games where we sit and discuss something where we don't know whether the cost saving is $10, $1,000, $10 million. So, and obviously that's what we're talking about. It's about priorities, it's about, and our experience with our own events is that when we go to one country, something can be extremely expensive, and in another country, very inexpensive. So it varies from one event to another, how these things are. But I don't think we can become the real good advisors that we would like to be without having slightly more insight to what we're discussing from event to event. I know that can be sensitive, and you need to consider how you want to put that forward, but I do think it may be necessary to take that step deeper than where we are with the SDP and the processes we've been involved in until now.
Ingmar, there was a question, then David.
Thank you, President. First of all, congratulations, and I really believe that this is a step in the right direction. But I have more a practical or pragmatical question with regard to the definition of the role and the responsibilities and the decision-making power or capacity or capability of the international federations in this whole process. I mean, there is made a lot of reference to international federations, but from a practical point, it would be good to know when, I presume that it will happen, but when and how this clear definition of the role of the international federations will be materialized, and as from when you think this is going to start to become implemented, because in the end it's already the goal to start this process with Paris 24. So I think it's almost now already that the role and responsibilities of the international federations needs to be clarified and defined. And then a little comment, side comment, you know, it's almost my mantra, but to have also a very clear sight and transparency on the budgets, and also have as an international federation really a capacity to advise on this, and because in the end we have the expertise and the experience in delivering these kinds of events. So I think we could really also contribute in going to budget efficiency from the experience we have as international federations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good point, Ingmar. David? You asked, no? No. So then Patrick Baumann.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also want to express my congratulations to Christoph and his team and the IOC for the work that has been done on this new norm, which is certainly a step in the right direction. I think if the objective at the end is to be as efficient as possible, ensure that there's a lot of cities bidding, or that there is at least a process in which we can work with a lot of cities, then certainly that is a good step in the right direction. Now, to me, it seems, however, that many of these parts require a lot of, not sacrifices, but further efforts from the international federation side. We're talking about how we can bring our expertise on the field. We see it's not always that simple with an organizing committee, also maybe because the timing of the different decisions have come at the wrong moment, and for the future it will be better. We're being asked to reduce our let's say, expectations in terms of venues. We've been asked in some instances to even think about reducing maybe athletes' quotas, timings, competition programs, and things like this. That's probably all good and fine because we are an important part of the house and we want to make sure that we have successful games and we want to participate. But beyond that, there are other elements within the whole business of an Olympic Games which maybe also could be tackled, and I'd be curious to know how the new norm applies in the commercial relationships with, between the IOC and an organizing committee, where maybe there are elements that could be tackled as well, so that just the pressure is not just simply only on international federations to be pushed, which we will do with pleasure because we want to make it successful. But there are other elements around because most of the time we get the commission. We cannot do this because broadcasters want it. We cannot do that because it's a financial issue for the organizing committee. And we do not have a clear view on those issues and why things are not changed or cannot be changed. So I'd be interested to know how the new norm applies to the other side of the coin. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Matt, rowing.
Thank you. Also, congratulations. Really fantastic work. Two comments. One is at the Rio Wash-Up meeting, we saw the relative costs of the total costs where sport was a relatively small part. So it'd be interesting to hear in your research since then a kind of a comment about the overall costs on security and the other areas which were huge. The second comment is, in your, if you could make a comment about, let's say, the cost of the spectator platform, all of the aspects related to spectators, because it seems the last two Olympics, well, the last one and the coming one, that the spectator, the number of spectators is really being cut, let's say, reduced, and how much is that in the overall perspective part of your reflection or not? Because we're with security, with mag and bag, with transport, it's becoming a huge area of cost for the organizing committee without perhaps a return on the investment.
That's Seb from IAF.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a specific point and a broader observation. The broader observation to start with is that I do hope we sort of focus on the communications around this as well, because one of the bigger challenges, whether we're an OCOG, whether we're an international federation, whether we're one of the constituent bodies represented in here, is to permanently be able to distinguish between a cost and an investment in this project. And I was pleased when Kit actually, I think it was Kit or Christophe, made it very clear that when we're talking about cost savings, we're not talking about cost savings in the investment end of this project, but we're talking about some of the specific savings that can be made by the OCOG, because I think it's a confusing enough landscape for the public, who are the most critical stakeholder, particularly at the community level, that don't really always understand the difference between what the OCOG does and what the infrastructural, budget through the public purse manages to do, and to be able to really identify that and not run the risk of a confusion, because if the bottom line is to reduce cost, then how you actually land that in communications terms is quite complicated, because what you don't want is the public sitting there and our constituent group saying, well, if you've managed to take that out, it was always slightly overinflated and at an artificial level. I think the second point is I do hope that we focus really closely on some of the commercial constraints that the OCOGs are under in terms of how there are cost savings. I could give you one very good example around how the IT element comes to the table, and the way that you are asked always to deal, quite understandably, with the global partner. Well, that probably puts at least $150 million on top of what you would normally be doing if you could take it to market. The same around some of the retail constraints, given the nature of one of the larger contracts. So I think it's really about how you land this communications-wise, because I think if it's not done really carefully, it can actually confuse the landscape. This is a very, very important piece of work, by the way, and I compliment you on that, but I do think some of the commercial constraints would free up revenue for the OCOG that would have the same, would probably have the same impact in terms of your cost-cutting drive.
Thank you, Seb. No other question? Please, Ricardo.
Yes, I congratulate the presentation of the new norm from Kit and Dubibi, because I think really that I don't want to repeat, they are going in the right direction for have the best success for the game, especially when you talk about the involvement of the federation with the IF experience to improve the competition. But I like underlining what the president of the Equestrian Federation say. Me too, I'm very pragmatic, and I hope that this norm will be really enforced, because I don't want to repeat what I said this morning, but for example, in the case of the game regarding baseball shop in Tokyo, I seem to have understood that the decision was agreed between the organizer and the IOC without without the involvement of the federation or even consultant from the federation. So I hope that really these rules will be enforced, because they are going in the direction to the best games and the best result. Thank you.
No other questions. Walter.
It might be eventually a little bit out of line, but I'm coming back to the sports organization within the organizing committee, and you are starting with Paris already, and have started. You know, I believe that when it comes to sports is the reason why the games are there, and I really question myself, is not the time coming now that the sports, whatever the sports person who is responsible for the sports department, whatever kind of title he has the time come that this person should be on the executive committee within the organizing committee. I think that will help most of our international federations, because then all the matters of sports is taken to the executive by the man who knows sports the most in an organizing committee.
Thank you. Other question or remark? So yeah, before asking Christophe, I can make a sum up. So it's clear that it's a very complicated matter, what we want to challenge now. So it's an existing model. All this discussion, I would like to make a remark only about the role of the IFs, that is a part of all this problem. As these two friends like Seb Coe and Patrick Baumann has very well outlined, it's clear that there are more complex problems, there are more limitations. The problem is much wider than the one related to the sport in itself. And the matter of the cost is always a very personal and discretional concept when you start analyzing. I want to just perhaps to facilitate a little bit, thanks our two friends for having given us a good explanation, as I said, philosophically, not to tease them, but to say that it's a very good intention project, this. From my point of view, as ex-operator of International Federation, the problem starts from a very simple matter. I felt that there were a lot of duplication. I felt that the skill of the International Federation should have been used better during the game, because people that organize every day perhaps are more skilled than people that are put in place for an organizing committee. But obviously this cannot be done in one day. And basically I said one day, I would like to see the IF as an arm of the IOC in organizing the game more than a counterpart, as it was in the old model, old general counterpart with other counterparts like the organizing committee. I have to say that Christophe Duby at that time, this was the first time of this discussion, many years, few years ago at this time, was embracing this concept. I want to thank him because it was not easy at that time. It was considered very revolutionary. I think we have to go this way and we have to try, but it's very difficult because you see, we try with Tokyo. In my opinion, it's so simple if you want to deal with all the 28 sports and to see what you can do better in cooperation with international federation. But it looks very difficult. So to change model is not so easy, as many of you has already underlined. So we have to appreciate the effort, the complexity, and perhaps to try piece by piece. And I would like to say, Christophe and Kit, keep in mind that the piece that we are interested in is to deliver the game at the less cost and the better way. So the big picture perhaps is a matter of the IOC in itself. The commercial limitations, the communication, everything is very important and could be reviewed. But I believe that for the moment it's already difficult to change what to me looks very simple, that is a more involvement of the International Federation. So this is my view as a conclusion today. Thanking again, I ask you to answer the question as brilliantly as usual.
Thanks. Thank you, Francesco. I'll lead and try and be practical rather than philosophical in some of the answers. But and then Christophe can fill in a few of the wider points. Starting in the order in which they came. Tom, I think you made a really good point about capturing the lessons of Tokyo, both in terms of the structures and the processes around the sport delivery plan, but also some of the detail, be it a sport-specific or a wider shared point across federations. We have worked with Tokyo to try and put in place a change management type of process which would capture when changes are made and ideally why. It's not perfect, but we're trying to capture that as we go, because already some of those lessons are relevant to Paris when we talk about venue design and some of these questions that are already on the table for Paris. We're actually still discussing some of those elements in certain sports for Tokyo. So here, we're trying to capture it as we go. It's a very good point, and the change management question around that is a really important one. We don't want to lose the lessons on the process or the specifics as we go. I'll pick up on Paul's point here as well, because you raised the point about the Excel versus a project management type of software. The reason we're using the Excel in Tokyo is simply because of their internal technology systems, and this is what works best for them to share the information across the organization. I agree, as we place more importance on it moving forward, there could be better technology models, and it's something that we'll raise with Paris already. We need to make sure whatever the solution is, it's simple enough that it's used by everyone and can be used by everyone, but also one that fits the purpose, Paul, and here we'll pick this up moving forward. And that may in fact also help on Tom's question. If you have the right type of software, it can capture those types of changes as we go and produce reports, be they by sport or by function. Kelly, you raised a fundamental point on the event management model, and here it's one we've discussed with the ASWF Multisport Working Group, and I think probably one you were grappling with also when you were in this chair a few years ago. We've started that discussion with Paris, to be clear about where we are. We had the first project review, as Tony mentioned in his quick update, in Paris, and we have discussed with them what that model will be. So when we progress that over the coming months, we'll come back and discuss that with the ASWF Multisport Working Group and start looking at some practical examples about how we can move forward with that for Paris. The intent is there to go down that model, but there's ripple effects, obviously, in terms of wider OCOG structures, including on our side, inside the IOC. So, but that's a question on the table. Now we have the organising committee in place in Paris. Now we've started that first project review. It's one of the top things on the agenda for discussion with Paris looking forward. Tayab, I think you raised 2 points, one on the wider city aspects, and I'll leave this one to Christophe. But you also quite quickly mentioned a critical point regarding the athletes. and the focus on the athletes. And here I think it touches on a number of the points that have been made. In all of this, we are trying to keep the focus on sport and on the athletes, and not cut on fields of play, on athlete services. Here, we want to keep the focus on what makes the Games so special, and that is the athletes and sport. And if we say sport is at the heart of the Olympic Games, it also has to be at the heart of this process. The balance on that, as a couple of people have touched on, is finding efficiencies that we can reinvest, as using the language that you said, Seb, about some of those priorities also, because we don't feel we've hit world best practice in every case in regard to sport and the athletes so far. So if we can reduce the overall cost and complexity, we can reinvest in improving some of those areas and continuing to ensure that focus is there even more in the future. And here we've got Kirsty Coventry, the chair of our Athletes Commission, and the athletes have been heavily involved in this, not only in the village, but in some of the other areas. That commitment to that focus remains. Thomas, you touched on the visibility of the costs, and here, again, a key point. I don't think anything frustrates you, or in fact us more, when you get asked to make decisions, when you don't have clear and comprehensible and credible information in front of you. The only way you can find savings is if you have all of the information in front of you and work it through with an IF, and this is absolutely the goal moving forward. When I said that example about saying having full visibility, identifying where the cost drivers are and saying what would you do if it was your event, that's the starting point, but you can only do that if you have all of the information in front of you, and this is a key part of the process. When we start those meetings, we will bring all of the information we have on your sport and your event and start working that through rather than bringing just prejudgments on what we think are the cost drivers. We'll bring all that information to the table, as will Paris when we talk about their venues. Ingmar, you talked about the decision making, and those discussions are starting now with Paris. That's not going to be absolutely the same across every sport, because not every federation wants that decision-making in the same places, and the nature of different sports is different. And here we use the example in Tokyo of you appointing some specialists yourself as the federation rather than the OCOG doing that. So we think the sport delivery plan provides a structure for that discussion and potential transfer of some of those responsibilities. Again, it won't be the same in every case, but we want that clarity, and that discussion with Paris starts from now when we start these specific ones. I think you also mentioned the point on clarity on budgets, so your expertise is used, but you can only do that when you have the information in front of you. Patrick, you spoke about the role of the top partners, the commercial partners and broadcasters. That is a key part of this. We know some of the challenges that both you and Seb, from the experience in London 212, I guess, were referencing, and I think, Christoph, you'll touch on this, because what we're discussing with you today, again, is the same discussion we are having with the NOCs, that we're having with the commercial partners, the broadcasters, and all of the other actors in the holistic planning and delivery of the Games. Matt, you touched around the spectators, and in some ways it touches in the visibility on all of the numbers. And here, whether it's driving venue capacities, whether it's driving competition schedules of loading people into venues, anything else, yeah, that visibility is absolutely critical. The other thing I would touch on there is that the spectator experience is a big focus moving forward. We realise that we're selling the once-in-a-lifetime experience around the Olympic Games, and we realise there have been some challenges around that in Rio, in Pyeongchang, and to show how we're addressing that in the Pyeongchang debrief, we're actually inviting some of the spectators from Pyeongchang to talk to us about their experience, not just us talking to each other anecdotally, but bringing some of the spectators from Pyeongchang to talk practically about their experience in ticketing, transport, in venue. But we know that the financial side and the operating side also drives some of those questions on numbers and venue design and everything else. That comes back to the visibility point, I think, in having all of the information. Seb touched on the tops and the broadcasters, but also the investment point, and hopefully we've addressed that. If we find the overall savings, we can reinvest it where the priorities are. Ricardo, real enforcement in terms of decisions and also clarity about who's saying what. Again, I have to be honest, nothing drives us more crazy when we hear people referring to certain decisions the IOC may have taken or the IOC's position in certain discussions if we don't feel that's really an accurate reflection. I'm not saying that's the case with you, Ricardo, but the way around that is us being part of those discussions and having the IOC, the International Federation, and the OCOG all having the same discussion at the same time. And this is a model we introduced for Rio, and it's something that we're doing more and more for Tokyo moving forward, having the three parties involved in the same discussion and having clear outcomes from that discussion. Walter, I come back to your point, and maybe one with 40 years of experience with OCOGs. Look, I think every OCOG maybe has a slightly different structure, and it also depends who you call the head of sport. Sometimes it's a sport director, sometimes it's a vice president with sport responsibilities. I think what is encouraging is, first of all, having people like Muto-san, Hide, Nunamura-san here listening and engaging with federations in this meeting. Equally in Paris, having 3 Olympians in the roles of president, director general, and sport director. But you're right, whatever the structure is, whatever the titles are, sport needs to be the focus of games planning and needs to have a voice at the table when decisions are made. And that's critical, whatever the structure is in that regard. And finally, Francesco, I think the operating arm, I think this is the direction we plan to go. This is an evolving process, but the commitment is there to make it a very practical one. Christoph.
Thank you, Kit. It takes really two. I'll go back to some of the answers and complete a few. Kelly, to your point about the event management, we have to take it from a very pragmatic angle. With Paris, what we are doing for June and the Coordination Commission is looking at each and every discipline, look at where we have existing venues, look at who's the operator, the National Federation, a private entity. Who are the operators out there in the market that could help us to deliver the events? In other words, look at the capabilities, and by June you know that for about half of your competition you have solutions in place on how you will deliver this discipline or these events. So when we're speaking about an event delivery, it's also using what exists without reinventing the wheel in each and every discipline inside the OCOG. How comfortable would that be if by June we know that Roland Garros we will have an agreement in place by the end of the year or current 19? You don't need to speak about Roland Garros for another 5 years. That's what we talk about. And then the question of structure, Kit, you're right, we need to solve this one. Tayyip, when it comes to your 2 points regarding the interpretation of the new norm, I think it's fundamental. Because currently, it's a document that is out there. But it's a document that has to live and breathe on a day-to-day basis. And one thing we haven't done properly, and there we're guilty of having fully loaded agenda probably, and not enough time to work with OCOGs, Tokyo in particular, who inherit as the first OCOG these 100 measures that we are proposing. And we have to do that. We have to make sure that the interpretation from the OCOGs is the same understanding as you have and that we do. So it's a collaborative effort, and it's a change process. And you know from your business that change is complicated. If we have the right spirit and say, okay, it's a co-construction towards a new model, we're getting in this direction. But we have to do more on the interpretation of each recommendation. Your second point about risk evaluation is important as well. Yes, we've looked at a number of risk, especially when it comes to turnkey solutions. So every time we are considering a turnkey solution, we're looking at 2 aspects. One, the delivery. Is it complicated to do? Do we have actors in the market that can deliver these solutions? But also, are we preventing the OCOG from making money on some of these categories? So we're looking at it for turnkey solutions. We're looking at it for requirements as well. When we say that we're going to review requirements and service levels with you, we have a number of data from the past. If we reduce 30% the accredited seating area for media observation, do we take a risk in your sport or not? We have to make sure that we cover the average, we have a small margin, but we don't plan everything based on peaks. So yes, we have reference points regarding risk evaluation across a number of areas. Thomas, we have a set of additional information that can be helpful. Hannah and Pierre are sitting in the back. They have a pack of information regarding past games usage. It's not the financials, unfortunately. One of the reasons why we don't have necessarily all the financial is back to our event management approach. Currently, we don't have an event management approach. Technology is a function. It's a big bucket of expense for an OCOG, about 20%. And I'll get back to that point afterwards. So one of the difficulties until we have a proper event management approach, when you know that for rowing, the cost of transportation is so much and the cost of technology is so much, you are in a situation where we have buckets of expenses in major areas such as security, such as transportation, such as technology, that we cannot properly break down. So we have references, we can help you with this, but until we have a proper event-based structure, including the budget, there we will have to work together to understand the actual cost of everything that is delivered for a given sport. Patrick, when it comes to the commercial relationships, we're looking into these contracts currently with all the tops. And when we speak about business integration, it's with the view of having the solutions that are truly budget relieving for the OCOGs. Seb, I heard your comments about technology. Once more, it is not a secret. It's about 20 to 25% of an OCOG budget, which is a really big bucket. What we have to make sure is that the solutions that we propose through TOP are efficient and cost-effective as well. So we are reviewing all this with especially our new technology director, inherited from LOCOG, and also each of the tops themselves. So in the renewal of the contracts, this is definitely where we are heading. When it comes, Seb, to your point regarding communication, you're absolutely right. And in the context of 2026 and this campaign, we've really made additional efforts, including from an IOC standpoint, to clarify the financial matters, because it's true, the debate is not understood when you speak about the reference to Sochi, for example, where you have a big number for these games. The games did not cost 50 billion. Not at all. Far from it. They did cost 2.3 and they generated 100 million profit. This is the reality. The rest were long-term CapEx investments. It's a different story. We have to make that clear, and we're providing a lot of material to the interested cities for 2026. And that effort has to continue. Our president, by the way, is using, when speaking about Agenda 2020 and the new norm, a catch line which I like, which is we have turned the page, and making reference to the games that have to benefit the host cities. So we're doing this effort most definitely. Finally, Francesco agreed with the spirit. Best possible games in the most efficient manner. I think it's the best way to describe the effort of everything we try to do. So once more, Francesco, for your guidance and foresight, thank you so much. And I think this completes the answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you all, and we close this item, but Kit had many more information to share with us by the sport department. I asked him to cut to the vital one, because I think for today this session has been already enough in terms of information that we have received. So Kit, only keep to the urgent one and to the one that you believe are a priority as much as you can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Francesco. As always, I follow the advice. What I would say is we distributed to all of you memory sticks that have a number of presentations that we didn't plan to present here today on sustainability, ethics, a number of areas. When you have the chance, please have a look, and we're available to answer questions. Just two very final things that I was going to address. One is to officially welcome to his first ASWAF General Assembly as a member of the IOC staff, David Lucas. Absolutely delighted to have David on board as our new head of summer IFs, and you all know David from his time with London, his time with hockey, and fantastic to have a triple Olympian and experienced OCOG IF person heading up our summer team, along with Bram, Ansley, and the rest of the team that we have here. Great to have you here, David, and part of the team. I think it's good for all of us. And finally, I mentioned Kirsty earlier. We are doing a very important piece of work on the Charter of Athlete Rights and Responsibilities. Kirsty, if you want to stand up. Kirsty's Africa's most decorated Olympian. And in Pyeongchang, as you probably know, was elected as the chair of the IOC Athletes Commission, which is fantastic for us. She's a wonderful ambassador and a wonderful leader of athlete representatives. And with Kirsty and Kaveh, my head of athlete programs, we're moving forward on a program called the Charter of Athlete Rights and Responsibilities, which is a really important piece of work to document what's important for athletes around the world, and we'll be in touch with you on that. So Francesco, Andrew, thank you for everything, for the daily partnership we share with you and all of the international federations, and we look forward to the joint meeting tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Christophe, and thank you, Kit. You are always available. So I hope this session, a little bit heavy, has given you at least the picture of what the IOC and we want to achieve in terms of cost of the games and future of the game. Surely we will have more presentation in the future. This has been, I think, the first touch of this very delicate and complicated matter. And we will follow the process. We hope in Tokyo something will happen. For the moment, not so much on this particular aspect, but I believe that with the help of our friend, we will go and we will progress. Thank you again, Christophe and Kit, and thanks for being here. Thank you. Now we move to the other topic of today is WADA, and I think we have with us Sir Craig. Sir Craig, yes, you are here. Good. So if you can come up. The chairman, the president of WADA is reporting on the last information. Well, obviously, unsurprisingly, as I said many times, doping is a topic, is still a topic. What we call the Russian cases keep us awake on this matter, and we hear what are the plans in WADA to cope with this problem.
President, members of the Council, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm sorry from now on this will not be philosophical, this will be intensely practical. I have with me Benjamin Cohen, who is still the director of our European office. As we expand that office, as we undertook with the international federations, I am not massively excited about losing the director of my European office. But he goes to his new position in the ITA with our very best wishes, and I'm sure he'll do a terrific job.
Welcome, Ben. Sorry, I didn't. Welcome.
This is a slide which probably describes as accurately as anything what we've been doing for the last year. You can see the variety of problems, ranging from contradictory decisions to difficulties with sample bottle supplies. So we have a number of important issues. And I will run through this presentation as quickly as I can so that I can deal with the bit that I think is of most relevance to the summer federations. But it will give you an indication of the range of activities that we undertake. We really sharpened our focus after Rio in 2016 and tried to set a completely different list of priorities. These depended entirely on what we were told to do by our stakeholders. And this chart gives you an indication of the enhanced work that we have to do on what we are currently committed to and the new duties that we have. And if you look at the new ones in particular, we have to deal with compliance more, we have to deal with intelligence and investigations more, we have to deal with whistleblower programs more. But it does give you an indication of the scale of the exercise. I'm running through this as quickly as I can, President. Let me deal first of all with compliance. In 2017, we created our own ISO certified code compliance monitoring program. This represents the most thorough review of anti-doping rules and programs to date. I think, as you know, we distributed 308 complicated questionnaires, and at the end of the day, we got 308 back. Part of the compliance system is to audit, and we prioritize these audits in areas where there is greater need. We collect information from other sources, from the ADAM system, the Anti-Doping Administration and Management System, from our investigation capacity, and we try at all times to offer ongoing support to all our signatories. The compliance monitoring system led through to the development of the new international standard for compliance by signatories. This was a result of a very comprehensive 6-month consultation period with all our partners, and many of you contributed to what the standard should say. It will produce a range of graded, proportionate and predictable consequences for non-compliance. We have to amend and have already amended a very small number of provisions in the World Anti-Doping Code that it necessitates, and the standard actually came into force 17 days ago on the 1st of April. We are undertaking too the almost 5 or 6 yearly compromise, and that's to review the current World Anti-Doping Code and the necessary following international standards. This will be a 2-year exercise with 3 phases, and it will culminate at the 5th World Conference on Doping in Sport, which will be held in Poland in November next year. I think it's worth remembering that we have an opinion from Judge Costa, who will be familiar to many of you as a former chairman of the European Court of Human Rights, which says that one of the strengths of the World Anti-Doping Code is the quality of the consultation process that we go through to make sure that it works properly. We have to look at some of the current code elements. One of these is going to be good governance, and I hope, Chairman, we might be able to look closely at the work that has been done by ASOIF and the international federations. We have come across a complication on the system of retesting of samples. That needs to be resolved in the new code. We believe that we need to have a better system of education, and we are creating an international standard for that. My Athletes Commission are looking at the anti-doping side of an athlete's Charter of Rights. Now, for intelligence and investigations, we used to have 1 investigator. We now have 6 and 1 to come. This team, which works completely independently of WADA management and the WADA board, is developing an international chain. There was a major conference held in Helsinki recently, and we are encouraged by the number of stakeholders who are involved in investigations and who could share in the work that is necessary and which we can lead. We are carrying out global operations with Interpol and with law enforcement agencies. Now, this is the portion, President, that I think I want to concentrate on. In November 2017, we secured a copy of the laboratory information management system from the Moscow laboratory, and that contained all the testing data from January 2012 to August 2015. There were 67,000 analyses in the database. So those of you who are comfortable with IT problems have some idea of the time that it took to crunch all of that. We have shared with international federations, the International Olympic Committee and the International Paralympic Committee a number of the issues, and the federations in particular are reviewing the data, and my intelligence team is on hand to receive their final conclusions. Now, I have to tell you that this slide was prepared about a week ago. And we live in a pretty fast-moving world. And I have received from our intelligence and investigating team an email from the director, which says a number of things that I think are highly relevant to those federations to whom we sent the information and have cases which appeared under the laboratory information management system. And Guter says it is a very complex investigation. And now, I think we know that, and I think without any doubt that you know that. He says that what we can see so far is that many international federations are overstretched with the complexity of the data. Therefore, we have opened up a specific account to deal with all LIMS regulations and questions, and to provide to you, the federations involved, as much data as possible. Now, to give you some idea of the complexity of this, 2 international federations have officially closed cases. 4 have sought advice from us on how to proceed with cases. 7 have requested details on forensic analysis, and that gives us a particular problem because to offer the proper advice, we need to have the reasoned decision from the recent Court of Arbitration of Sport case before that we can do that. And 4 international federations have requested anti-doping reanalysis of WADA seized samples. So we're in a situation where no one size fits all. But what we intend to try to do to help you is to prepare a results management flowchart. And this will indicate to you that given certain degrees of information, it will indicate to you what your reaction should be and how the decision should be taken. We're going to send that package to you, I hopefully within the next 10 days. And we will provide this decision flowchart. We're looking at our own legal people to make sure that it is as accurate as we can get. We're preparing a document entitled, would you believe, Questions and Answers for Steroid Profile Cases, which again is an issue which faces a number of federations. But we do ask you only one thing, and that is we really need to have one point of contact with whom we can liaise. And some federations change the point of contact. We need to know whom we're dealing with at every given time. Now, I hope this is helpful, because this is one area of the recent problems we've had which we must resolve. We're not going to resolve it quickly. I have other issues to do with resolving the compliance of the Russian anti-doping agency, which goes on almost on a daily basis. But we have to start to do this, and we have to finish it, because if we do not, I think sport will be diminished. I think the fight against doping in sport will be diminished. And I'm almost to say at risk is the reputation of international federations, that might be diminished as well. So we regard this as having extremely high priority, and we now want to help you complete this as quickly as we possibly can. Now, let me run through as much of this as we can. Our whistleblower program, Speak Up, is in force since March 2017. We've had 209 contributions. We have a new confidential information manager, and the investigations which have been running, almost all of them, are based on information from whistleblowers. We need to build capacity. We need to build partnerships, and for example, we have successful partnerships between Poland and Azerbaijan, UK and Belarus, Canada and Jamaica, and Anti-Doping Norway and Turkey. We can't do this on our own, and there are 16 regional anti-doping organizations which now cover 134 countries. One of the accusations that is rendered against an anti-doping system is that those efficient countries test people well and regularly, but it's not the same the world over. This is complicated. This is the solution to doing it, but we need to resource them and we need to help them. We've had issues with laboratories. A working group chaired by Professor Erner looked at some of the difficulties we've had, and it produced a report which said laboratory performance to the highest level is required. We cannot have good laboratories and bad laboratories. If the laboratories can't meet the proper standards, then I'm afraid they will have to lose their accreditation until they can meet the proper standard. But the accreditation system and the quality assessment process must be fair and transparent. And laboratories must work together to help all the laboratories provide the best service possible. Nothing could be worse than sanctioning an athlete wrongly because the laboratory got it wrong. Scientific research, we have struggled with this. WADA used to invest about $6.5 million a year, and it now invests about $2.5 million because pressures on budget have had a pretty dramatic effect. We were helped greatly by the contribution from the International Olympic Committee, which was matched by governments, and it produced around $13 million. But that has been, I hope, wisely invested and it is now almost entirely finished. And we need to work on the prohibited list. We need to work on the TUE system. And we do need to work on the information on the prevalence of doping. We had our 4th TUE symposium recently, and we estimate that since 2001 we've invested $73 million in research grants. Under the social science research area, 3 grants there. We've launched a new anti-doping learning system. It's almost impossible to do this in written form with the different languages and printing and distribution. It's much better to do it on a web-based basis. And as I said, we are developing an international standard for education and information. We are consistently challenged by our athletes to make sure that the ADAMS system works in a way that is convenient for them. I said yesterday that my experience of IT decisions since about 1999 is almost universally wrong. Hopefully what we have now with our integrated team in-house developing the ADAMS project will work extremely well. So we have to be adequately resourced. The governments of the world are being invited to consider increases in their contributions, and I hope that debate is brought to fruition throughout this year. And the Olympic movement already indicated that, as they have done since the outset, they will match that dollar for dollar. So a strong and united sports community will help restore public and athlete confidence in the system. And as quickly as I can, that's what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And if you have something by Ben, otherwise I go to the question. I think WADA is at the crossroad, and after this difficult time, WADA has taken a little bit the lead in making another step up. As you heard, obviously we need money to do that. I can say that as a chairman of the finance committee of WADA, I know how much we have to do to get some consensus, especially from the government side. But we are, at least this year, we achieved 10%. It was quite special. What I ask you is to ask Craig about the real new step up in terms of compliance, in terms of new activities that he mentioned. So if there is some questions, this is the right time. Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to address two particular points and then make one comment. The first point is the point that obviously is on the table for everybody of us as international federation is Russia. And I would like to understand what is exactly the correct position for an international federation in accepting or not accepting currently, today, these days, bids for events for its own international federations. My own federation is in the middle of a bid process, as an example, and Russia is bidding for a youth event, just to be very practical. But we've heard and read that there's a little bit of pressure made to a number of international federations to avoid hosting anything in Russia as long as RUSADA is not compliant or not reinstated. And at the other hand, we have received a copy of a correspondence sent by WADA to the Minister of Sport of Russia, whereby, in fact, the legal position is that as long as this non-compliance comes from the previous, under the previous code and not the one that is applicable as of the 1st of April of this month, events could be held in Russia. So we're kind of a little bit confronted with two different positions, and we would like to know which one is the real one, if I may say so. Obviously, from a purely, let's say, philosophical perspective, we are all encouraging, and we did so through the Olympic movement position in WADA, that the reinstatement of RUSADA, if it works well, we think that it should happen already, understanding whatever might be the arguments that are posed, we believe that despite those arguments, the reinstatement should happen. Now, the second point that I would like to raise is then a little bit more general, comes, however, into the same chapter about the compliance. As of the 1st of April 2018, the code now says that we can only accept bids from countries where NADOs are in compliance with the code. And I shorten it, that's Article 20.3.11. So today there's quite a number of lists of NADOs that are not compliant, and potentially in the next meeting more NADOs might be non-compliant. I don't know. I mean, that's something maybe that you could explain. But how, as an international federation, the moment when someone is declared non-compliant and then this article applies and we are maybe in bid procedure or have already awarded events, it is quite complicated then for us as international federations to step away from commitments that we have already taken or from processes that are in the middle of processes. We don't find hosts every day. I mean, some maybe very important sports find it more easier, others less, and I'm not talking as GAIF's president, where maybe it's even more complicated to find hosts, but this is something that is really a little bit of concern, this particular point, and given that we are in the middle of a revision of the WADA code, it may maybe merit more consideration to make our lives a little bit more easier, because this immediate kind of couperet may create a lot of problems to many international federations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Patrick. It's a very important point. Other question? Hassan, handball.
Thank you, President. Only question, what is the difference between the individual sport and the team sport? I want. This is something I want to ask, please. Thank you.
For doping, from a doping point of view. Yes. No. Matt, rowing.
Thank you, President. Coming back to your slide about limbs and McLaren 2, let's say, talking to some colleagues, we were pretty shocked about the news of the past week. And we wondered if you wanted to make any comments about that. Our friends in biathlon. But trying to close the McLaren cases, I'd like to just publicly request that WADA helps organize a meeting with WADA's lawyers when the reasoned decision does come out, and try to help us really understand what was supported by CAS that we can use in our own prosecution of these cases. And we don't want to be accused of being asleep, because we aren't, but we don't want to risk unnecessary legal costs going on a legal track that wouldn't be supported at CAS. So I mentioned that to Ben, and he said he'll organize it. But I want to go on record. We aren't asleep. The ones who haven't responded, we're playing it prudently to really make sure we have our legal foundation solidly under us.
Thank you, Matt. Good question again about the follow-up. No more question. Craig, Sir Craig, you can.
Thank you, President. Patrick, the situation may appear to be unclear, but in legal terms, I'm afraid is very clear. It is that having produced a new standard for compliance, our legal advice very clearly was that no sanction could be brought about based on a compliance, non-compliance that existed before the start of the new standard. So we fall back, I'm afraid, on the current code provision, which requests federations not to award world championships to Russia while the Russian anti-doping agency is non-compliant. And that's where we are. I suppose some people might have said it would have been easier if you'd been able to backdate the compliance payments, but we can't. As far as the rest of the situation is concerned, it doesn't just affect international federations. It affects major event organisers, and we invite them not to award major competitions to a country where, Benjamin may have the actual wording, where the NOC, the NADO, is not compliant. The solution to all of this, in my mind, is quite clear, and that is to do everything we can to resolve the problem we have with the Russian anti-doping agency. But in the meantime, that's what the compliance standard says, and is a result of a consultation process in which you were all involved. Hassan, the difference between individual sport and team sport, Ben, you were an individual sportman and you certainly were a team sportman. Would you like to explain what difference there is, if any?
Thank you, Mr. President. From a very technical perspective, I think there are not too many differences in the codes, and I think this is why you ask the questions, because you probably want that there be a difference and that team sports be treated differently. At the moment, I don't think this is the case. There is a code revision with a 2-year consultation process, so I encourage the Handball Federation to make any statement or a proposal in that regard. At the moment, the only differences are that for whereabouts. Out of competition testing, there is individual submissions of whereabouts, whereas in team sports, you may have team whereabouts as you following a team, a club, rather than an individual athlete. So at the moment, that is the only difference. And I understand you. I know that there will be a meeting organized by team sports to address that issue, and I've recommended UEFA, because UEFA is the host of that meeting, together with you, to file recommendations to WADA soon after the meeting so that we can take that up for the consultation process of the code.
Yeah, and Matt, to you, the whole effort with the LIMS database is to try to help you do precisely what you've asked. Those federations with difficulties on the technical problems that were highlighted in the CAS case, we want to speak, yes, to you. If that involves putting lawyers together, yes, we will do that, because we want to help in every way we can. And you asked me to comment on something that happened in the last few days. Is this the investigation in Austria? Yeah. We operated, as far as I know, because I do not see these reports, nor should I and I don't want to. But we operated on information which came to us by whistleblowers. We presumably found out that there was criminal misconduct, and that was then passed to law enforcement in Austria. I have to say I rather regret that having been done, there appears in the media, not from WADA, but perhaps in some way from law enforcement, comments which move from one law enforcement group to another. And I wish that had not happened, because from my point of view, if we are asking whistleblowers to come forward and to be treated in a proper confidential manner, it is really very bad that when we do our job properly, we end up in the media for the wrong possible reasons. But thank you for your question, and I hope it never recurs. Chairman, can I also compliment you on your ability as chairman of my finance committee? I used to struggle like mad for 10 years to get an increase of 1% from government, and with his inevitable skills, Mr. Rucciubitti gets an increase of 8%. So quite clearly, I was wrong for the previous 10 years, and we should add him as chairman of the Finance Committee a lot earlier than we have. Thank you very much for all your efforts.
Be kind, but thank you, Craig. And more questions. We close this session. Thanking Craig and Ben, and wishing Ben the best in his new capacity that will start in the next month of ITA Director General. So we are getting closer to the end, and our agenda is now moving to the next item, is election of a council member. We have only one candidate. So according to our constitution, the election could be made by show of hand, as I would recommend, but if a request exists, we can go to a secret ballot, and we are ready, we are equipped for this secret ballot. The only candidate is president of the wrestling, World Wrestling, Nenad Lalovic. So I ask you first, according to the Constitution, if you accept the voting for show of hand. Please, who is in favor of the system of voting show of hand? It looks that, who is against? Abstention? Yes. No, but it's much. Yes, but the majority was very clear. What do you mean?
Just to clarify, is anybody requesting a secret ballot?
This was my meaning of against. I'm not British, but.
No, but if there are two, they only need two.
No. So nobody's against, so I don't think it is a request. So I believe we can proceed with the election of the new member of the Council of Azov, with the candidate of Nenad Lalovic by show of hand. Who is in favor of the election of Nenad as member of the Azov Council? Please raise your hand. Thank you. Who is against? Is a bad guy? No. Okay, good. Congratulations, Nenad. I can invite you to come up if you want to sit, because we have also some missing members. Okay, thank you. Congratulations. And if you want to say some words, please, you send a letter. You can follow up your letter. Be short, but you can say something. Anything? Okay, good. Yes, few words, yes. This was my invitation.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, I want to thank you for the confidence you have in me. But it's not only today, it was 3 months ago too. And I can assure you that I will protect your interests and the interests of this association at the best of my abilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we move to any other business item. We have only one item, and I am pleased to have here with us Matthew Ribb, Director of CAS, because we have some information to be given. A project of CAS to install a permanent section for anti-doping first level of judgment in CAS. Obviously is an opportunity that follows the ITA activity in terms of the anti-doping program, and obviously it's not compulsory, but is advisable because it's, as Matthew will tell you, is a good opportunity, and CAS has got the invitation of the IOC to put in place this permanent session to serve better the sport bodies. So Matthew, if you can shortly present the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. Presidents and General Secretaries, take just 2 minutes of your time. In 2016, the Olympic Summit made 2 recommendations. The first was the creation of an independent testing authority, and the second was the creation of a unified first instance authority dealing with doping matters. And it was suggested that the Court of Arbitration for Sport would establish such authority. So we are working on this now. We are working on this new permanent CAS anti-doping division. We already experienced it successfully at the Olympic Games in Rio 2016 and also in Pyeongchang in February this year, but only for the duration of the Games. The objective now is to have this anti-doping division permanent, which would replace, possibly, the anti-doping panels of the international federations on a voluntary basis, of course. It's not something mandatory, but we offer a new service which would say, discharge some federations of that business or task. The CAS ADD would create a list of experts, of arbitrators expert in anti-doping matters. We would provide also a service which is as quick and efficient as possible. We know that sometimes it's not possible to be as quick as we would like to, but we are still focusing on that. And we provide also a possible appeal to the classic CAS with arbitrators different from the first group of the anti-doping division. Regarding the list of arbitrators, we hope to have a list of around 50, 60 people. We are also welcoming recommendations by international federations, also the NADOs, to have some good expertise. People coming from these anti-doping panels may be also considered for joining this new anti-doping division. And we are also aware that we need to make this as less expensive as possible and should not be more expensive than now for the federations. So this is something we will keep in mind in order to offer a service which is free of charge for the users. And of course, we will see how to fund that, but it should be funded by the ICAS, the International Council of Arbitration for Sport, throughout the current system we have in place. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Matthew. If there is some question, but this is just, we want to take the opportunity to have him here to present this opportunity. It's clear that we will send information to all the federation about the system. Basically, is another initiative to make a little bit more distant the international federation and more independent from the process of the sanction management in doping. So thank you, Matthew, and surely we will follow with the international federation with more information from the office. Another small, any other business has been requested by the new elected member of the council, Nenad Lalovic. Please, Nenad, if you want to raise your point.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I wanted to speak about this problem during the meeting on the point 6.2, but it was at that moment inappropriate. So I take the opportunity to say a few words about it now. And I would like to attract your attention to a problem arising more frequently And these are the cases of disrespect or boycott on competitions of different sports. This disrespect is politically motivated by rulers or ruling parties of different countries. They are trying to promote their policy more internally than internationally. It is not about one or two countries like before. That becomes more spread. And by instructing their athletes not to compete against some other nationals, or they do not allow some foreigners to enter their countries, not willing to raise flags of some countries, and so on. This is harming first their own athletes, but they don't understand it. Then the organizers, of course, our international federations, their fellow athletes from other countries too. I think the time came to show more determination in stopping this kind of behavior. From our federation, we had recently to cancel one continental championship qualifying event for Youth Olympic Games because we were close to be in a dead end with the authorities of that country not allowing some athletes from some countries to enter the country. And we canceled it. It was very risky 3 weeks before the competition itself. Of course, we had a solution, and we did it. I believe that there is any doubt about the clear understanding of all ASOIF members that among all our duties, international federations, we have to protect and serve our athletes, to respect the Olympic Charter, to provide for our competitors the same conditions, respect rules of fair play, and so on, like raising flags, playing anthems, and so on. Some sports are more affected, and it happens that we have to negotiate with the organizers or local authorities to meet all the conditions which they accepted to provide while bidding or when they were assigned for those competitions. And we are not always successful. To finish this intervention, my proposal will be to take a common firm position by all of us on political interference on our field of play. Otherwise, sooner or later, more and more international federations will be harmed, and the Olympic movement as well. We can maybe speak about the statement. We can maybe, with the President, prepare something for your approval in the next future, but I think that this becomes a disease. Before we had 2 or 3 countries, today we have much more. And with the political situation, this is increasing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nenad. As you understand very clearly, the problem is the discrimination that is taking place. So I would like, before acting, perhaps to make a check, because many constitutions, I know the constitution of the sport that I served for many years, it already include anti-discrimination clause. That means that you are entitled to take the decision. So we have to see, and we should recommend perhaps anti-discrimination law in all the international federation constitution, because sport is by definition has to be non-discriminating. But we know that sometimes you have to solve problem also in a practical way, in urgency, and we should avoid. I fully agree with, in principle, with what you said. Practically, we should reinforce our system of control of anti-discrimination clause. And I believe that I will ask to make a sort of survey from the Constitution clause, and then we see what we can recommend. This is my answer to this fully supported concept of presented by Nenad. Thank you. And now we move to I cover myself. I will be very short because tomorrow I will be a little bit more extensive with our IOC president. As you know, normally there is an item in which I anticipate the point. The points are 4 or 5, and I can list it for you. The first is a report about the project, the existing, what we have presented today, what we intend to do in the future, including our expression of intent to help our federations that are a little bit in a difficult time. When I report about the games, and surely I will, in general, report about the Tokyo situation that is generally good, with some specific concern of process, of decision-making, and so on. I will report about the doping situation, means WADA, and our concern about the new rule in compliance, just to present what has been very well expressed by our friend Patrick this morning, now in the last report of the WADA. Then I have a point about finance, in which I ask the president of the IOC to tell us as soon as he can the provisional figure on which we can work, because our tradition is to approve the model of the revenue distribution in the year before the games. So the plan is to approve this model presented by the Council next year. And so these are the points, and obviously the routine point, the election of a new member, the change of constitution. I will inform the president that there is no risk, nothing is okay, is risky. We have decided very wisely, and so this are the point in which I will present tomorrow morning the ASRO position as a tradition after the forward of the president of the IOC, and then we listen to the answer, and then as usual, and so, okay. This is, if you have comment, but these are a summary of what I'm going to do tomorrow morning, as usual. So this conclude, if you don't have any comment on this conclude our meeting, except that we have some housekeeping by Andrew, and then I will thank all of you later. Please, Andrew, if you have to inform about something.
Well, yes, President, it's just that behind the scenes today, there's been a fierce bidding war to host the next, co-host the next ASWAF dinner. And I'm delighted to inform you that for 2019, there will be a team sport effort of the combination of modern pentathlon and taekwondo. So a big thank you to those two for supporting the dinner next year. But the competition has been so fierce, and following intended new, let's say, practice by some of the federations, not wanting to disappoint anyone in a beauty contest, 2020 will be co-hosted by the IAAF and UCI. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, this is our generous friend, and now I'm going to close. This is my duty to close this meeting. I hope you have found this meeting. Please. Ambon.
Is going to pay the...
Tomorrow we are talking with Thomas about the WADA and what we already discussed today. And my opinion, because I had a meeting before I came here with our people for IHF, they are working with WADA, that they are asking for a lot of requirement. This costs a lot of money. And now my opinion that we have to put some things for Thomas tomorrow, that we have to support the International Federation, special things for WADA to be anti-doping control.
But tomorrow you are free to raise specific
No,
points.
I asked you. If you already accepted that, we can talk. Or if not, I ask you as a president, we can put in your point that comes from you, that coming from us also, that
So I don't know if everybody agrees. So perhaps there are people that are in a different situation. Everybody has his own situation with the anti-doping program. I'm not talking with WADA. If you have a problem that can be supported by other federations, you are very free to raise. I will do general points. So the general concern represented by me, the ones that are more specific, you are free, and the president is always happy to hear if there are specific problems. So which
but if the General Assembly take a decision that we wanted to support from IOC about the requirement, because it will be cost it means 3 times what you already spent now.
No, I want to understand, because again, I don't understand very well what you want from the IOC.
Support, financial support from
Financial support.
International Federation.
I want to clarify that the IOC, most likely the answer will be, I can anticipate because I'm involved since 15 years, for me in this, the IOC pay 50% of the cost of VADA, 50% of the cost of VADA. Then now it funds the startup of ITA. So the IOC is putting a lot of money in doping. I'm not sure he's intending to put more, but you can ask, so no problem. You can ask, you are free to ask. This is a very specific point. I think IOC is supporting enough in terms of financial, the anti-doping fight. The IOC pays really a lot of money, 50% of VADA, more than startup of ITA and so on. So I don't know if they are available, but you can ask. I'm not against. Please. Patrick.
On this topic, maybe just to add a point of, I think we will not be exempted, and it's not going to get cheaper, to make it simple. The International Testing Agency will be there, and we are fortunate that the IOC has put quite substantial amounts of money into the testing agency in order to move. I think it's then everybody's choice whether yes or no you want to enter into that particular part, and the General Director is here. But overall, the whole work around the fight against doping, even though we will keep the costs at the level they are today with the DFSU and into the ITA, I don't think we can have an illusion of that it's getting cheaper. It's quite the contrary. I think that we will have to continue to invest in the fight against doping, even if we have the ITA and even if we have the, and that's not necessarily just because WADA is increasing the requirements, just because it's part of our need.
Patrick, I'm not talking about basketball.
No,
I'm
no,
not talking
I'm not
about
saying
there are
basketball.
some, no, I'm talking about some, I don't like to say small federations, that's heavy cost for some international federation to follow what you already sent us. This is my opinion. I'm not talking about myself.
We agree, and you can raise the point, but there are federations that are very happy to invest a lot of money. So the question could not be a general question, could be a specific question. So no problem. So you can ask to be supported. But clearly, your question comes from the fact that perhaps somebody told you, VADA, that you have to do more. I don't know where is coming your request, because here there are federations that in their own budgets they put a lot of money or less money according to their judgment to have a good anti-doping program. So this is the problem. If you believe that you don't have enough money to support a program that is required, you can ask the president of IOC how you can manage this question, but it's not.
I am not talking about handball. I'm talking about some of our colleagues.
Let them talking.
This is okay. Thank you.
They can talk. They can talk. So if you talk about, if you are the patronage, tell them the people to raise the point, that, and the president will answer. So I don't know. Thank you. And so I close, I think, with this question, I close the meeting. I thank again all of you. I hope, as usually, has been a very tough day for all of us, but it's been about enough informative and satisfactory for your work at home. So I cannot see, because our good friend Patrick Baumann, as a distinguished member of this convention, is not yet ready to tell us where we go. So I cannot say see you somewhere, but I'm sure we will find a good place to go next year. Thank you, and see you tomorrow at the session with the IOC.